Hello and welcome to the Jank Bank. My name is Brad and I'll be your host as we explore fun, unusual, and unique commander decks that can still hold their own and win games. As a quick disclaimer, these decks are tuned to my own personal budget and meta, so feel free to make changes as necessary. The commander for today's deck is Pramicon Sky Rampart, a 1/5 wall with flying and defender for blue-red-white. As Pramicon enters the battlefield, we choose left or right. Each player can only attack the player nearest to them in that direction. Pramicon is an impressive defensive card, essentially cutting off half the table from attacking us. But why do we need that protection? Well, we are trying to hold our opponents off until we can find our namesake card, Time Warp. Time Warp very simply gives us an extra turn. However, taking extra turns in Commander has become something of a faux pas. In similar fashion as land destruction, taking extra turns prevents other players from, playing the game. But what if instead of taking an extra turn, we took all the turns? Instead of a hated strategy, we suddenly have a win condition. For the first part of our combo, we're going to need something that puts Time Warp back into our hand. Archaeomancer, Salvager of Secrets, Izzet Chronarch, Mnemonic Wall, and Anarchist all let us return an instant or sorcery to our hand when they enter the battlefield. But that only lets us use Time Warp one additional time. Or does it? Conjurer's Closet allows us to flicker a creature at the end of our turn. And Deadeye Navigator and Tidespout Tyrant let us return these creatures to our hand in order to replay them and put Time Warp back into our hand. We also have Helm of the Host and Followed Footsteps to make token copies of these creatures, giving us both additional ETB triggers as well as another body on the battlefield each turn to attack with. Also, while we're on the topic of Helm of the Host, if we equip it to Pramicon, we can set the copy to go the opposite direction of the one currently in play, creating a loop in which no one can attack. So now that we're taking infinite turns, how do we actually win? Well, pretty much any way we want. We can use Blue Sun Zenith to mill our opponents, Gutter Snipe to ping them all to death, or Approach of the Second Sun to just win the game outright. Speaking of winning the game outright, we also have Laboratory Maniac and Jace Wielder of Mysteries, each of which let us mill ourselves in order to win the game. A pretty easy feat when you're taking infinite turns. We can also go about winning the game the old-fashioned way, by attacking with an army of creatures. Young Pyromancer and Murmuring Mystic each make a 1/1 token whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. Talrin Sky Summoner and Kaikar Wind's Fury also make tokens whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, and Kaikar's tokens can even be sacrificed to generate mana. This is incredibly helpful as our combo can be very mana intensive. Saheeli, Sublime Artificer, gives us a token whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. And we can also turn an artifact we control into a copy of another creature or artifact we control until end of turn. Metallurgic Summonings gives us an XX construct whenever we play an instant or sorcery, where X is the CMC of that spell. And if we control 6 or more artifacts, we can also pay 3 and 2 blue and sacrifice it to return all instants and sorceries from our graveyard to our hand. And Docent of Perfection makes a 1/1 wizard whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. But then, if we control 3 or more wizards, it flips into Final Iteration, which has the same ability, but also gives all of our wizards +2/+1 and flying. As I mentioned a moment ago, this combo can be very mana intensive, so we're also running Goblin Electromancer, Baral Chief of Compliance, and Primal Amulet, each of which reduce the cost of our instants and sorceries by 1. And whenever we cast one, we put a charge counter on Primal Amulet. Then, if it has 4 or more counters, it flips into Primal Wellspring, a land that taps for a mana of any color, and when that mana is used to cast an instant or sorcery, we copy it. Lastly, we have just a few counter spells to protect our combo and round things out. We have the usual suspects, such as Swan Song, Dispel, and Disallow, as well as Arcane Denial and Mystic Confluence, which allow us to counter as well as draw cards. Now, I've thrown a lot at you, so before we continue on to the ramp, let's go down to the battlefield of Jank and see how these cards work together. Let's start by setting up our combo. We cast Time Warp for an extra turn, and then play Anarchist to return it to our hand. Now, on our next turn, we equip Helm of the Host to Anarchist. We play Time Warp again, and then go to combat. Helm of the Host creates a token copy of Anarchist, which returns Time Warp to our hand again. Now, as we take more and more turns, we can play out things like Kaikar, Talrend, and Young Pyromancer, and slowly flood our board with an army of creatures. So now that we've seen the deck in action, let's take a look at how we're going to get the mana we need to cast all of this with the ramp. Starting things off, we have Soul Ring, which costs 1 and taps for 2, and Commander Sphere, which taps for any of our colors, and we can sacrifice it to draw a card. Color fixing is almost as important as mana advantage in this deck. So, we also have Azorius, Boros, and Izzet Signets, which we can pay 1 and tap to add 2 mana of the respective guild colors. Next up is Talisman of Progress, Conviction, and Creativity, each of which tap for a colorless, or tap for 1 of 2 colors but deal 1 damage to us. Finishing it up, we have Chromatic Lantern, which taps for any color and allows all of our lands to do the same, and Smothering Tithe, which gives us a treasure token whenever an opponent draws a card unless they pay 2. Next, let's take a look at how we're going to get the cards we need into our hand with Draw Power. The draw spells in this deck are mostly centered around digging through our deck for our combo pieces. We have things like Ponder, Brainstorm, and Preordain, which let us dig a few cards deep. Opt and Chemister's Insight are here as well, basic cantrips that can help us dig through our library and trigger our token producers. We also have cards like Fact or Fiction and Faithless Looting, which can generate a lot of card draw for us, as well as Skull Clamp, which can get out of control with some of our tokens. Rounding things out, we have Mystical Tutor and Gamble, both of which we are going to use to tutor up Time Warp. Now let's take a look at how we're going to deal with enemy threats with the removal. Nothing too crazy here, just a nice variety of spot removal. Things like Return to Dust, Swords to Plowshares, and Path to Exile can easily throw a wrench in our opponent's strategies. We also have Wear and Tear and Generous Gift just to keep our bases covered. Say what you will about White's place in Commander, but the removal is second to none. Moving on to board wipes, we have Blasphemous Act, Supreme Verdict, and Terminus, which can help slow down the game while we get our combo together. We also have 2 of my favorite selective board wipes with Cleansing Nova and Austere Command, which allow us to wipe large portions of our opponent's board with minimal disruption to our own game plan. Now that we made it through all the spells in the deck, let's check out the lands that help us cast them. The name of the game here is Color Fixing. We need all of our colors as quickly as possible to get our defenses up and start setting up for the win. So we're going to be running all of the shock lands in our colors, as well as the check lands. We've also got the pain lands, which are great for early game color fixing, and pain-free colorless mana in the late game. Next we have the temples, which I'm usually not too fond of, but every bit of card selection we can jam into this deck is welcome, and they do tap for 2 of our colors. Now we have the Vivid lands, which are great for color fixing in the early game, and then even when we run out of charge counters, still tap for colored mana. We also have Command Tower and Mystic Monastery, which tap for any of our colors, and Exotic Orchard, which potentially does the same depending on what our opponents are running. And Evolving Wild and Terramorphic Expanse, which are a bit slow, but serve to thin the deck and fix our colors. Lastly, we have 4 basic plains, 10 basic islands, and 4 basic mountains. And that's going to do it for today's deck, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, so please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest episodes. The Jank Bank is brought to you entirely by the incredible generosity of our patrons. If you'd like to join them in supporting the channel, click the link in the description below. And with that, we bring the show to a close. See you next time, and stay janky.